My name is Agnieszka Rumińska. I am composer and sound designer. I have been working in game industry for over 7 years. First in Anshar Studios, where I spent 5 years as the only audio designer in the company, working on such titles as Observer, Telefrag VR, DLCs for Divinity Original Sin 2, Game Deck, creating sound effects, composing music, implementing and optimizing audio content. Currently, I'm with Superkami, and I'm working on sounds for Sengoku Dynasty, which is survival simulator based in feudal Japan. In the meantime, I spent 2 years teaching sound montage and music production in the Academy of Sound Engineering. And before that, I studied composition and music theory, classical vocal studies, sounding games, and also some sound engineering courses. But enough about me. Today, we are going to focus less on content, more on department cooperation and production management. After my last talk at Game Industry Conference, people said they found my lecture on audio very accessible for outsiders, and that encouraged me to expand the subject of audio designers' cooperation with other departments. Game making is a multidisciplinary process, and I like to think of audio design that way, as a part of a greater whole, and therefore my subject for today is impact of audio tasks planning on other departments' work. I divided this talk into 3 parts. The first one, where I outline the benefits of involving audio at the early stages of mechanic design. The second one, where I touch on the importance of including audio when implementing those mechanics. And the third one, where I outline how to speed up audio designers' work thanks to team members' support. I'll refer to my own experience, so my examples will describe small to medium-sized projects. And before I get to the point, why do I focus on production? This is sound design section after all. I believe that audio designers' work rests on 3 pillars, which is creativity, technical solutions, and production. And by production, I mean organizing work, identifying interdependencies between departments, establishing pipelines, predicting edge cases, and cooperation with outsourcers, and some other stuff, of course. And these are as much our duties as creating content is. And when the production aspect falters, other aspects suffer, and the overall quality of our work drops. Besides, it may seem obvious, but it's worth repeating, audio is not a standalone creation. It's function in the context of other departments' work and depends on structure and internal politics of a company, its business goals, direction of development, and maybe the most important, current limitations. And the reality in the small and medium-sized projects is often as follows. Low budget for audio. Not enough producers, which transfers managing duties onto specialist leads, including audio designers. An expanding team may have little experience working with an in-house audio designer, and yet may suddenly have to do just that, and it's particularly likely in the small, rapidly developing companies. And finally, leaving audio for last. And this is a very damaging decision. Omitting audio in the pre-production phase and cursory audio planning will cause the problem down the road, not only for audio designers, but also on other departments, and will lead to overloading the final development stages. Therefore, I'm arriving at the main focus of my talk: why you should include your audio designer at the early stages of game development and how it can help you avoid overloading other departments. So, first section, working with design department. It's easy to think that since you have no visuals yet, there is nothing to sync audio with. Therefore, audio design gets relegated at the end of the line, forcing audio designers to crunch right before the release and programmers to hastily patch additional system right at the critical phases of development. Yet, audio does not always need to be completely dictated on other content. It can be on equal footing, or it can actually lead in the process. Often, shifting audio's content's priorities can diminish other departments' workload and help to improve the final product. And let's have some example here. Let's take as an example a game where the player's aim is to extract resources from deposits using tools. And we have different tools and different deposits. Here are some possibilities. The first one, when we are trying to extract some stone resources by using a tiny little simple knife. That sounds unreasonable. And such action leads to UA message and lacks of hit deposit sound, which is a signal to the player that they will gain nothing that way. The second case, when we are trying to cut very thick tree by using a low tier tool. UA message and flat, unsatisfying hit deposit sound informs the player that tool is too weak for the job. And the third scenario, when we are trying to hit the stone deposit using the right tool, the pickaxe. UI message and the standard normal hit deposit sounds informs the player that the process is working just fine. And some additional two special scenarios. Final hit. Final hit is the last hit which gives the player more resources than the previous hits. And it is accompanied by a full, rich and satisfying hit deposit sound and UI message telling that the player got some additional resources. And the last one, when the tool's durability ends, the player hears breaking sound of a tool, and sound is customized per tool type, and this is a signal to the player that the tool needs some replacement. And what I find vital in those examples, having an actual animation done in detail is not necessary here. In all those cases, well-made UI and sound effects supply all the information the player needs to have to fully understand the process. And the most important information is what the player can get, what they need to use to get it, and what quantity of it they can get. UI and sound work in tandem to fully deliver this task. So, therefore, including audio and designing mechanics give you the following benefits. The first one, you don't need to push other departments to give you full polished content. You can sell it with sound. And the effect is that you are saving other departments' time and lowering the costs. Second benefit, when you plan your audio tasks early, the programmers have time to create an architecture that already includes the all slots for audio. They do not need to hastily patch that into an existing architecture towards some critical stages of production. And often it's take more time and leaves no room for iteration. And the third benefit, an audio designer can create content and test it, implement it right away and test it in the scene within the context of the entire scene, which gives us huge advantages because we are able to hear how the sound works within the whole context. We have time to make iteration, and it leads to have the better results. So to sum up this case, lowering the costs is giving the profit for 3 departments, and the game clearly communicates with the player. And how to approach this in practice? And this is the part to the designers and producers mostly. Designer should have a plan which includes all departments. The planning meeting should follow a checklist to see what kind of input a given epic or mechanic needs from every department. All departments leads should discuss what needs to be done, and it's a very good practice to provide an early design document before. It gives us, the leads and specialists, it gives us a chance to prepare before the meeting, and thanks to that, we are saving the time during the meeting. And what are the goals for audio department here? When designing a mechanic or system, designer and audio designer in tandem should answer the following question. What is the role of audio in these mechanics? What are the keystones for audio and how they can elevate the player's experience? And the sooner the role of audio is defined, it's easier to include the tasks into the programmer's timeline. Which brings us to the next section, working with code department. I ask designers for thinking about audio at the early stages of mechanic design, and I ask programmers for including slots for audio when creating an architecture for those mechanics, and preferably in the early stages of production. This is extremely beneficial, especially when it comes to creating some systemic solution. And let me focus for a moment on that matter. Personally, I try to design as many systemic solutions as I can and implement them as soon as possible. I aim to see which situation within the game can be built using a system. And it's of course depending on the game, but the 2 main criteria I follow are: when a sound is repeated many times in similar contexts, this is probably a good place for a system. And the second one, when a sound is an inherent element of a key game mechanic. And this is like these examples with the tools and deposits from the previous section. So this is probably good news for you, because this kind of tasks, there is highly possibility that they will get some high priority on Jira during the planning, and the programmers will be able to deliver systemic solution very soon. So it's worth to monitor those kind of cases. When I determine the potential for systemic solution, I do the following steps. I list them as tasks. I prioritize them by importance. I consult ideas with code department, and this is important programmers can support me with solutions or advise some other solutions, maybe more efficient one, maybe better one. So it's worth to talk. And then I ask production to include those tasks in programmers' timeline. And the most tricky part, I push creating these systems in early development phase to be able to use this pipeline. Implement some placeholders to be able to test if the system actually works. And if it works, check if my audio design really serves the game well. And that's important. If no, I iterate. And if the iteration is no good, I have to do some redesigns and I'm back to square one. But if it serves the game, I'm creating content pass 1, possibly pass 2, of course implementing it, and leaving polishing phase for later to be able to design next systemic solutions. And this is my personal approach, system first, content later. Because if I have this systemic solution at the early stages of development, I'm much more relieved. It's good to have those systems in place as soon as possible. Basically, the most important. And there will be time to polish this content. For example, when the programmers will be overwhelmed by some other tasks. So my personal opinion is that it's good to set aside some tasks that the audio designer can work on independently from other departments, because it comes useful at the late stage of development, that independence. And the second thing, a little side note here, I've learned to check if these tasks for systemic solutions are really there in the timeline. A task in the backlog is no guarantee that the system will be ever completed. So it's worth to monitoring it. So now let's put all of this into perspective and let's have a nice simple example. Let's take a game as an example, realistic game exploration game in a realistic setting where the scene needs the varied bodies of water. And the challenging part is that the scene needs these bodies of water in varied shapes, sizes and types, such as big and small rivers, slow and fast rivers, mountain rivers, waterfalls, large static deltas, lakes, swamps, the ocean. So, as you can see, quite varied content indeed. So how can we deal with that? I've got 3 scenarios for you. You may, of course, place the aching ambient sounds manually in the scene, but you may also die from it, and if it doesn't kill you, optimizing for Nintendo Switch will. Yes. You can use custom-shaped volumes with simple logic, such as on-actor begin overlap, which triggers a proper sound for you. And this seems more reasonable. But here's the thing. If the level designer reshapes or moves the bodies of water, audio volume is often magically forgotten. And that's how you get the waterfall sounds in the desert. Best avoided, I think. And the third scenario, design single systemic solution for all situations. Guess what we choose? Of course, the third one option. No, the first one. Although I have seen it from my own eyes, the first scenario. So the player the blueprint checks the player's location from the center of the river, and it moves an AK event along an axis, producing numeric value. This numeric value is binded with a game parameter in wise. The parameter steers the blend container, which contains a diversified sets of samples, close to the river and far from the river, for example. The same parameter steers some other settings like filtration, volume, etc. Effect: programmers gave basically one programmer gave a few hours of his time at the early stages of development. All the designer had time to test the system, do some iteration, and create diversified content. Simple, accessible implementation allow the audio designer to customize it by setting AK events as variables in the blueprint. And the result, players receive a varied, realistic sound signal. And this is important. In the meantime, a level designer changed the river's shapes, type, strength, placement, but functionality remained within the blueprint and kept working regardless of all these changes in the scene. This would not have been possible with any other custom solution. All I needed was to copy the logic, set the variables in the blueprint, which took 10 minutes of my time and 0 minutes of programmers' time. Because the system was set beforehand and worked correctly. So, to sum up this case study, what I've learned from this situation: if you want to avoid mindless, repetitive work, #scenario1, design systemic solutions. This saves time for you both, the programmer and audio designer. Lesson 2, second. If you want something done before the release, ask to have specific tasks included in the programmer's timeline during the planning. Don't keep them in the backlog for later. The third, it's good to set aside some tasks that you can work on independently, like I mentioned before. It usually pays off later. And the last one, creating systemic solutions in early development stages reduces your technical depth. You avoid having to slap on band-aid solutions and keeping programmers away from other tasks. Thus, we arrived at the third section of my talk. This is also about department cooperation, but from a bit different perspective. And it's about how to speed up audio workflow thanks to team members' support. It's happened a lot of time in the industry that the small project or medium-sized project have only one audio designer in the company at most. And this puts a huge responsibility on the shoulders of one person. So what can a team do to streamline the work in this situation? A team can take care of its task tracker. Detailed task division allows me to link issues to myself, flag task that blocks me, and track the progress of upcoming task. And here's a little example. It's much easier to track one single animation than the whole big task mock-ups cleaning. This makes my workflow better because I can always check what I can do next. What can production do to streamline the audio work? To include the audio tasks in programmer's timeline. Include time for testing in the audio designer's timeline. My experience shows that playtesting and tweaks are rarely included in the audio designer's schedule, and regular testing is a must-have. The QA may not know the audio design as well as the audio designer, and some issues can be spotted only by sound specialists. And why is this important? The sooner a bug is noticed, the less time can be spent analyzing the change set in a repository, and the easier we can detect the cause, which in turn accelerates resolution. And the third thing, what production can do, include audio department in early planning meetings and redesigns. I appreciate it a lot because I can catch how exactly audio depends on other departments. I can define the keystones for audio in the early production stages. I can understand my game better thanks to those meetings. And in case of some larger redesigns, I can estimate how much audio will change and how strongly the production plan will be affected. What design can do? Include audio at early mechanic design stage. We discussed it today. Provide the audio designer with the priority list. They allows me not to overthink what's important during some intense development stages. And this saves my time and prevents me from going in circle. And another thing that prevents me from going in circle is providing a feedback and consulting audio design. No one knows the game better than its designer. So designer's feedback is a solid gold. Leaving an audio designer alone, particularly when the game design is floating, is a terrible idea. So if you value your time and your audio designer's time, take the feedback part seriously, please. What can programmers do to streamline the audio work? Think of audio and include audio at the mechanic development stages right during the architecture designing. This is the thing that we talked today, and consult systemic solution for audio from a coder's point of view. We also talked about it today. And some tools design for detailed debugging and some for automatic and simple repetitive tasks. Besides, it's always a good idea to ask for your programmer's advice. I appreciate a lot of fluent communication with the programmers. What can 3D and LD do? Set physical materials to objects and surfaces of the landscape, and place and model the more demanding trigger volumes. This is a huge help, and it saves a lot of audio designers' effort. So these two practices are worth negotiating with your team. Strongly recommended. QA. QA can set up a QA playthrough that includes audio designer. Thanks to that, I can get to know the game better if testers give me the feedback, some hints. And this is particularly valuable when the audio department is included only for the optimization stage, because audio designers don't know the game so well because they haven't participated in the full process. Also, supply gameplay videos for specific requests. If I can get a short video, I don't need to go through the hours of gameplay footage. So this is a small effort on the QA side and a huge time saver for me. And finally, what CEO can do to help audio designers work. Invest in software. When I came to Superkami, the software was chosen via mutual agreement before I started at the very first day. This led me to start my work immediately and implement the content on the actual software used without migrating down the line. And this is really great thing that saves a huge portion of time. The second thing, buy libraries and other equipment. Personally, I try to record and design from scratch as many sounds as possible, because I want to avoid overused sound signatures. But there are some cases that requires libraries. For example, when the samples are hard to record, like exotic birds. Or if library already have them in real great quality, there is no sense for me to record them from scratch. And the third thing, outsource some tasks, marketing tasks, additional content or mix master. So basically, these kind of tasks that can be separate enough to be outsourced to the other person. And if you're going to take away only one thing from this lecture, let it be this. If you feel that you still have too many tasks, it's always better to reduce your scope than burnout. No project is worth sacrificing your health. I leave you these points as a PDF file in this QR code, so you can download it, print it, and put on your fridge, or hopefully on your boss's or producer's fridge. And we are moving to Q&A for a moment, but if you are too shy to speak in public, you can talk with me later, privately, or you can find me on social media. So please reach me out. And that's it for today. Thank you very much. Time for Q&A.
We have any questions?
The point you mentioned about production planning in test time for the audio team, or yes, the audio person. I was just wondering at what stage you think that testing should be. Is it testing right at the end, or is it sort of incremental throughout production?
Sooner is better. And sometimes if something doesn't work correctly, I can spot it only on the early stages. I have more time to deal with that. So personally, yeah, this is my strong opinion that the sooner better.
Potentially also a chunk at the end as well, or would you prefer to have it all already?
I've noticed that at the middle of production stages, when all systems are there and we are putting additional, we are populating the content to this existing system, it's a great time to do play testing more intense. Because with the having content pass 1 and 2 in already there is a perfect chance to test all of this. Mm-hmm. So yes, of course, every time I'm designing a system and programmers help me to deliver this system and trying to test it on placeholders, of course, I don't know. I never made a commit without testing. Yeah, so it's a basic rule. But some play testing that are about going through the entire game, for me personally, it's very important to know my game well, because maybe I missed something, and I can notice it at a bit later stages when there are more elements, and I can spot that design that looked very well on paper, in reality doesn't fit to the game. Mm-hmm. So if the design is set beforehand and very strict, which is a rare situation in game dev, I think, it's a more calm scenario. But floating design is something that happens a lot of times, I think.
Do you ever request for dedicated audio time at the end with minimal other development work
Yes.
going on?
I don't know if I understand it correctly. Time for me testing my game and also QA testing the audio.
But also just audio in general, just for polish maybe, or would that be a production workflow that you tried at all, or is it unachievable?
Yes, I'm testing it myself. For example, of course, with the profiler to checking some sound levels if they are appropriate for the consoles, etc. So the last stages of production, it's a lot of testing, tweaks in mix, etc., and polishing. Yes, but the polishing doesn't work without testing.
Yes.
Yeah. So yes, of course.
Agnieszka, thank you very much for your time and for presentation.
Thank you for having me.